Our, our second to last presentation is Shay Steeves. Let's give it up for Shay. Shay is a double major in environmental studies and political science, graduating this quarter. She's also pursuing departmental honors. And here's a fun fact that I did not know until tonight. In addition to her studies, Shay is the reigning officer and fourth-year member of the Husky Triathlon Club. She really knows about things in motion, getting things moving, which is pretty important given the title of her presentation, Moving Plants, Moving Mindsets, How Assisted Plant Migration Can Help Combat the Climate Crisis. Shay's host organization was Northwest Natural Resources Group. Her site supervisor was Rowan Braybrook, and her faculty advisor on campus was Laura Prue of the UW School of Environmental and Forest Sciences. Let's give a big round of applause for Shay.
Right. The climate crisis is scary. Can I get a show of hands of people in this room who are concerned about climate change? Me too. In Washington, one of the biggest indicators in terms of climate change is seen in one of the most beloved elements of our landscape, our forests. Research has shown that Washington's climate will no longer be a suitable habitat for some of the state's key tree species if climate change continues to accelerate at its current rate, which will affect our forest health, species diversity, and ecosystem stability. However, there are many novel strategies in motion to combat climate change. For example, in my internship, I looked at how thinning trees can help preserve snowpack from climate warming. One of these more radical seeming strategies was when I studied in my independent research. I looked specifically at a new tool in sustainable forestry that actively prepares ecosystems for a changing climate called assisted plant migration. And this term led me to generating my research question, which was, how can assisted plant migration in Washington state's forests be used to take both iterative and adaptive action against climate change? But what is assisted plant migration really? Assisted plant migration, or APM, looks to tackle species extinction through the human-assisted movement of a species to an area outside its indigenous range, where it would be predicted to move as climate changes were it not for anthropogenic dispersal barriers, or most critically, lack of time. My research primarily centered on a site called Stossel Creek in Carnation, Washington. I worked with the Mountains to Sound Greenway Trust and my internship, the Northwest Natural Resource Group, looking at the third-year data of 10 potential species for APM across over 14,000 seedlings. Specifically, Stossel Creek is targeting species that have the potential to adapt well to future projections of Washington's climate, such as trees from Southern Oregon and California, as these trees come from temperature zones that are likely to reach Washington between 2041 and 2100. Stossel Creek measures survival, growth, and vigor rate with focus on mortality and notes of damage. I utilize these tools as well as a literature review to assess the data from the site and the process of APM holistically in order to answer my research question. In the data, survival rate showed highest success in California and Oregon Douglas fir, which is ideal as these are the types of tree species that come from climates that Stossel Creek wants to simulate. And we're also able to see what species may struggle when moved. When we look to growth rate, we see that Washington shore pine and Washington grand fir skyrocket above the others. But because the seedlings are so young, it's important that we look closely at this data over the next few years in order to see true data correlations. We still have a lot we need to learn. Stossel Creek also monitors tree vigor, which is the ratio of annual growth of wood on a stem per unit of leaf area. Once again, Oregon and California Douglas fir perform the highest, but as you can see, there is a lot of discrepancies across the indicators, so we need more time in order to see true patterns come about. So why is APM not being utilized in more forests? There are many barriers to its implementation, such as accessibility of species from plant nurseries, lack of federal environmental legislation, and primarily ethical pushback from the general public. APM can be viewed as a radical strategy, as moving species in an inorganic way can feel wrong, or some people see it messing with the laws of nature. However, in order to have radical transformations of our world in the face of climate change, we need radical strategies in order to do so. That means going outside of our comfort zone of what we feel safe about doing. Throughout my project, I spoke with experts from nonprofits and research studies on APM feasibility. And the main takeaway from these conversations has been that the risk of new strategies is nowhere near the risk of inaction. APM is well on its way to being a strong fighter in the battle towards climate resiliency. In Washington, visitors to national forests average over 6 million times per year and curate yearly spending of over $290 million. is without question that our forests are vitally important to not only our lands, but every person that calls Washington home. This type of work must continue to safeguard our environment for future generations and preserve Washington for its beauty, resources, economic opportunities, and tourism. So, where do we go from here? Seattle City Light is now paying for the monitoring and future maintenance of Stossel Creek in partnership with nonprofits. The ultimate goal is to get 5 to 10 years of data with key takeaways that may be applicable to larger scale projects. For all the rest of us, we need to push for and stay educated on environmental legislation, get involved in our community, and most importantly, be open to new strategies that are outside our comfort zone, even if they are scary or not in our scope of knowledge. Because it's okay to be scared about climate change, but we cannot be scared to fight it. With that, I want to say a huge thank you to my site supervisor, Rowan Braybrook and Joel Mann from the Northwest Natural Resource Group, my faculty advisor, Professor Laura Prue, my amazing internship partner, Margot Clark, as well as my incredible family, friends, and loved ones. Couldn't have done it without you guys. Thank you so much.
All right, we have some questions for Shay.
Yeah, in the middle.
Does the system have any success stories on an even larger scale?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So they asked, does assisted plant migration have any larger scale examples or larger scale examples? So one that I found in my research study that's probably one of its most famous success stories is the Florida torreya, which is a tree species down in Florida that was on the endangered species list and really risking extinction. And a group got together and they suggested the strategy of assisted plant migration, and they moved it about 300 miles up northward. And this new environment, it ended up really thriving in, and now it got taken off the endangered species list. This was in 2007, so it was a while ago, but it is still a thriving species and it's no longer at risk of extinction.
Very cool.
Yeah.
This plant migration would be put on a smaller scale, like in backyard, really with Will's presentation with urban green spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a great question. So Margot asked, can assisted plant migration be used on a smaller scale? And this is awesome for all of us to know because we do assisted plant migration pretty much every day. I imagine a lot of us have trees, or not trees, but plants in our homes that are not from around here. So we can migrate and move plants all over. Though assisted plant migration does look to be more in smaller scale areas. You can definitely, or in Washington, moving to another zone of Washington or state by state, you can definitely do it on smaller scales. Yeah.
Are there any strategies you found that prevent migration that would result in invasive species?
That's a good question. So they asked, are there any strategies that I found to prevent invasive species? So this is something that comes up a lot in the process of assisted plant migration. And I don't know particularly, but that's kind of what projects like Stossel Creek is wanting to test out. Because Stossel Creek not only has the assisted plant migrated species, like the 10 candidate species there, it also has about 900 other species on the site in order to test out how these 10 species do amongst a full ecosystem. So Stossel Creek itself is testing kind of those sort of questions. It's still in motion since the project is only in its 3rd year, but hopefully we'll have more data soon.
Great. Maybe one more question.
Yeah, in the back.
What does assisted plant migration do to the plant's original biodiversity? That area that it's leaving from, where does it leave that?
Yeah, so they asked what happens to the species that are moved in assisted plant migration? And typically when assisted plant migration is done, we actually are accessing this plant species from plant nurseries. So they're not actually being taken from a wild zone usually. So it will kind of depend, or it may just be replicating, moving some of the species from one site. So it's not taking all of them. So that way the ecosystem isn't collapsing. But yeah, accessibility of plant species from nurseries is actually one of the primary issues, is there's not always enough of the types of species that we need. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah.